everyone. I'm Leanne.
And I'm Malevolent Michael.
And this is Unschooled History. Crone, sorceress, weird sister, bride of the devil. These are all terms that have been used for this week's topic. Witches. And their male counterparts? Wizard, warlock, sorcerer. Over the centuries, witches have scared us, entertained us, repulsed us, and fascinated us. Traditionally cast in evil roles, or at best neutral. Today, witches and wizards are starting to be cast in heroic roles and, in the case of one of our favorite musicals, as an anti-heroine. So, let's look at the history of real witches as well as the folklore surrounding them. So, first things first, where does the word witch even come from? Well, it's kind of obscure. So, we know that it comes from the Middle English Wicca, which in turn comes from the Old English Vika, which is pronounced Vika, but spelled W-I-C-C-E. This is because Old English is derived from German, and this is the feminine form. If it's spelled with an A at the end, it's masculine. But going back further, there are no cognates outside of Germanic and Old English. The Old English dictionary states that the word is likely deverbal or derived from the verb, but has no origin for the word Vickian, to bewitch. The Brothers Grimm, yes, those Brothers Grimm, who were actually linguists professionally and just collected fairy tales as a hobby, connected the word to the Gothic word vix, meaning holy. And that's what the weird-looking word is there, that's vix. But they also postulate that the word could actually come from similar Gothic words meaning to curve or bend, to dance or to move, in the sense of to make mysterious movements. Other theories are that it comes from the Proto-Germanic word for soothsayer or from a Proto-Indo-European word for waking the dead. But in none of this do any scholars believe in the modern-day myth put forth by modern Wiccans that the word ever meant wise woman. So, there you go. That's a myth. And we're going to cover some more myths later, too. So, and be busting them. Now, one of the first... Okay, so there's your etymological info dump. Now let's talk about the earliest literary record we have of witches. It's in the Bible. Specifically, it comes from the book of 1 Samuel, which was written somewhere between 931 and 731 BC. In it, we see the story of Saul, who is trying to defeat the Philistines. So he goes to a woman called the Witch of Endor. No, not the forest planet with the cute teddy bear like Ewoks. The Canaanite city. Saul asked the witch to consult with the prophet Samuel about how best to defeat the Philistines, and she summons the dead prophet's spirit, who proceeds to predict that Saul's sons, and in fact Saul himself, will die. The next day, Saul's sons are killed in battle, and Saul commits suicide. That's kind of grim, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's what you get for consulting with the dead, which is prohibited.
Yes, it is. And, y'all, I'm not saying that we never, ever speak to the dead. I mean, look at St. Joan of Arc, who we'll be talking more about later. I mean, she was talking to saints, but they contacted her first. She didn't go about them. I should probably explain that we Catholics believe that the dead, that ghosts fall into one of three categories. Saints bringing us a message from heaven, or our loved ones in purgatory, or demonic entities from hell. And because the last can imitate either of the first two, we just don't. No.
You don't summon them.
You don't. But if a saint comes to you and it really is a message from heaven and everything. Awesome. And there's a museum of purgatory in Italy,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of cool.
Yes, there is.
So, yeah. From about the same time period, we have Homer's Odyssey. In it, we learn about Circe, who is the daughter of the sun god Helios and the ocean nymph Persa. Other accounts make her the daughter of Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft, which makes sense considering that Circe is a witch. In the Odyssey, Circe turns some of Odysseus' men into swine. Odysseus' second in command warns him and others who are still on the ship, and Hermes tells Odysseus how to get his men back and how to defeat Circe. Circe keeps Odysseus around for a full year, sleeps with him, the whole shebang, before telling him how to get home. Now, there are later legends, believe it or not, that state that Circe gave birth to 3 sons for Odysseus, and that, as well as a daughter.
Huh.
Yeah, I know. Or wait, no, the daughter was from a different lover. And that Telemachus, Odysseus' son from with Penelope, killed his half brothers, and to make up for it, um, he married Circe's daughter from another lover, and then killed his mother-in-law, Circe.
Complicated.
Everything in Greek mythology is complicated. You've seen the family tree of the gods of the Greek pantheon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, there's Circe for you. Okay, before we go any further, I want to talk about witches versus witch doctors versus shamans. I think this is really important. Um, y'all, these are not the same. And while there are some modern witches who call themselves shamanistic witches, real shamans would be appalled at the term and offended at the comparison, as would witch doctors. On the left are 2 Lhasa witch doctors from the Borno state of Nigeria. On the right are statues of Jacri from India. So, what are witch doctors? Well, they're not witches. They're healers. Specifically, they're healers that treat illnesses and wounds brought about by witchcraft. On the other hand, these are shamans. Like witch doctors, shamans are about healing, but they do it through interaction with and direction of spirits and spiritual energies. They are not witches. Here we see a Buryat shaman from Siberia, a female shaman or medicine woman from the Clayoquot tribe of Canada, and one of my personal favorites to watch, a Mudong from Korea. If you want to see them in action, look up Mudong Chung on YouTube. It's absolutely beautiful, and I'm not going to lie. I My first exposure to the Mudong was in an episode of MASH, when there's a lot of stuff going on and an old man insists on a shaman being brought in to exorcise the evil spirits from the area.
And they use a real mudang.
Yes. the Well, I'm not sure if it's a real mudong, but I know it's the costuming is real, the dance is real. So it's a real outfit. The mudong chung that she does is real. So it's a fairly accurate representation that you see in this episode of MASH. And nobody knows who she is. I've done so much research trying to find out who that woman is, and I can't find her name. But she was really cool. She may have been an actual Mudong. I'm not sure, but yeah, that is these are shamans, and like I said, they are not witches. They do not do witchcraft. They fight witches. Okay, so now on to something a bit further up into history. Persecution for witchcraft was something that happened throughout Europe in the medieval period, but we need to address some serious myths and talk about the reality, and one of the biggest myths is that of Joan of Arc, shown here. And the myth is that she was burned at the stake for witchcraft. No, she was burned at the stake for heresy. And let me get this straight. She did not actually commit heresy.
No.
She was French.
Yes.
And that pissed off her captors because her captors were all English, and those interrogating her in the ecclesiastical court had English political ties, and she was cross-dressing, and it was purely political, and the whole trial was a sham, and in fact it was considered heresy because she was cross-dressing, but those who wrote later about it, who were there, admitted that she never should have been accused of heresy for cross-dressing because of the reasons that she was dressing as a man, because it was considered permissible when done for reasons of necessity, and Joan would have been doing it for reasons of necessity. In this case, because her stockings would have been tied to her breeches, and her breeches to her shirt and everything, and this would have helped prevent molestation and rape in prison, as well as while being out in the field. And that would count as necessity. But it was a whole sham. It was all politically motivated. But she would not have been burned if she had been accused of witchcraft. Witchcraft was a felony, so in English-speaking countries, witches were hanged, not burned, and this included in the colonies here in the U.S. So let's bust some more myths. Millions were killed. Once accused, a person had no chance of proving their innocence. The Spanish Inquisition and Catholic Church instituted the witch trials. Witch hunts and persecutions were actually about persecuting women. James I was terrified of witches and persecuted more than any monarch. Witches were really goddess-worshipping midwives. Myth, 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 and myth. In actuality, only 60 to 90,000 people were accused, and only 2,000 of them in England. Only 25% of those accused were found guilty. The Spanish Inquisition executed only 2 witches. The majority of witchcraft persecutions were done by Protestants, specifically Lutherans, Calvinists, and Anglicans, including Elizabeth I, who persecuted way more witches than James I, whose major thing was the book known as Demonology. And 10 to 15% of those accused in English-speaking countries were men, and men were in the majority in Scandinavian countries. And as for the goddess-worshipping midwives, nobody was goddess-worshipping. There's no record of it. In fact, records show that midwives were working with the accusers, helping to find the witch marks on the body that would help identify a witch. So, there you go. These are all myths. I'm not saying these are good stats. Not
by a long shot.
Not by a long shot. They're not good stats. 60 to 90,000 people killed for being accused of witchcraft is 60 to 90,000 too many. But, that's still far from millions. And 25% is only a quarter of 100%. So many myths, and it's just none of them were true. So let's talk about that book that James the First and Sixth, or Sixth and First, depending on if you're Scottish or English, wrote. James the Sixth of Scotland, James the First of England. Demonology. It covers way more than demons, though. It also covers werewolves, which we covered last week, vampires, and sorcery. In covering sorcery, it covers how and why a witch can and should be prosecuted under canonical law. It's also said to have inspired the Weird Sisters in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And quite honestly, this is a cool looking production that I found this picture from. There are a lot of cool productions out there. There's a cool cartoon. For God's sake, don't watch the one with, oh God, what's his name? Jean-Luc Picard. Patrick Stewart in it as Macbeth.
He does a good job, but the production, yeah.
Patrick Stewart, we have nothing against you if you're watching this. We love you as an actor. You're great. But that production of Macbeth sucked. The whole interpretation of it sucked. Sorry. Another major book from this time period is the Malleus Maleficarum, also known as the Hammer of Witches, which was written by a Catholic priest named Heinrich Kramer. It is perhaps the best known treatise on witchcraft. It gives very detailed legal and theological theory, defines witchcraft under the felony of heresy, and advocates for the destruction of witches. What led to Kramer's writing of the Malleus Maleficarum was the trial and acquittal of accused witch Helena Schuberin. Kramer was apparently obsessed with her sexual behavior, which is what led to the accusations in the first place, and was then charged with some illegal behavior himself, which was related to Schuberin's acquittal. The local bishop expelled Kramer from Innsbruck as a result, and 2 years later Kramer wrote his book. So, a little bit twisted. Just a little.
Just a wee bit.
Now let's talk about the Salem witch trials. It's January 1692, and the local minister's 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth and his 11-year-old niece Abigail are having fits. They're screaming out in terror. They're rolling around on the floor. The local doctor diagnoses bewitchment, and soon 5 other girls are having similar fits and making accusations as well. In February, a slave named Tortuga, a homeless beggar named Sarah Good, and a poor elderly woman named Sarah Osborne are all arrested for witchcraft. The 3 women were questioned before the magistrates, even as their alleged victims continued to have fits there in the courtroom. Good and Osborne deny their guilt, but Tortuga confesses, perhaps hoping to avoid further questioning and even save her life, and points her fingers at still other women, and the hysteria spreads. More are accused, including Martha Corey and Rebecca Nurse, 2 upstanding women of the community and church, and even Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter. A 4-year-old accused of witchcraft. Accused witches who were convicted were hung, died in jail, or, as in the case of a few, including Giles Corey, the husband of Martha Corey, pressed to death. His only response, more weight, was immortalized in Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible. Now, the question is, what caused the Salem witch trials? What caused this insanity to spread throughout this small village of Salem?
Some theorize it was ergot poisoning.
which is?
A fungus that grows on wheat and infected the bread.
Yes, that is one of the major causes that is theorized by scholars. It and of course ergot grows. Of course, ergot grows when it's extremely rainy.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a lot of rain, when the rye is growing, it's going to mold.
Yeah.
And that's how ergot forms. Well, it was, in fact, extremely rainy that year. Another theory is that a brutal battle called King Philip's War may have helped affect things. There was a fear of further attacks and raids from neighboring Native American tribes, and several of the afflicted girls who accused women of bewitching them had witnessed earlier raids firsthand. It has been suggested that PTSD from witnessing these terrifying attacks and the culture of fear generated by the continued threat may have played a large role in generating these accusations and the mass hysteria that followed. Another possibility, teen angst and patriarchal oppression, because let's face it, it was a strongly patriarchal society. You've got these girls who are tweens and in their early teens, and a few in their early 20s. I hate to say it, but teenage hormones have been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
Teen angst has been around forever. And while it wasn't just young people who were making these claims, the fact that theirs were so prominent have led to some to believe that simple teenage angst may have been the factor that helped lead to all of this. And some feminist historians have interpreted the trials as another means of the patriarchy to persecute women who acted in ways that were different from the accepted social norms at the time. We know of at least one story where a young widow who chose to wear her husband's clothes and work the farm herself was accused of being a witch.
Yeah.
And we saw that on an episode of Mysteries of the Museum.
Yes.
So you've got sexual oppression and individual oppression and hysteria, and then there's the cold weather theory. And it's a very simplistic answer. And it did coincide with a 400-year period of lower than average temperatures. This was towards the end of what was really a minor ice age.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what climatologists call it, is the little ice age. And it increased the frequency of crop failure. Colder seas prevented cod and other fish from migrating as far north, so you don't have as much food. You needed scapegoats for the changes in weather patterns. So you've got the middle of a 50-year-long cold spell that afflicts the whole world, and you need scapegoats for all this. So blame the witch. Blame the witch.
And then there's just simple mass hysteria.
Yes, just simple mass hysteria. Rapid spread of conversion disorder, a condition involving the appearance of bodily complaints for which there is no organic basis. In such episodes, psychological distress is converted or channeled into physical symptoms. In fact, there's actually something like that today that we acknowledge. You can actually have seizures similar to epileptic seizures simply from too much stress.
Yeah.
So there you go. And something like that might have been a basis, a factor in the trials and the accusations. And of course, boredom, guilt. They, Betty, or Elizabeth, Betty as she was called, and Abigail were playing under the furniture. They were screaming. They were barking like dogs because they were bored. And so Betty's father calls in the physician. He sees nothing physically wrong with them, decides they've been bewitched, and instead of admitting to just being bored or admitting that they were playing a fortune telling game, which they likely were, then because let's face it, they were restricted from pretty much all forms of play and leisure at that time and place. That's Puritans for you. Um, so between that sort of behavior and becoming and developing interest in fortune telling and magical stories, which were allegedly introduced to them by Tituba. Um, so they're going to have guilt. So then that might have caused them to say, "Hey, we've been bewitched, and these are the women who did it." So there's multiple reasons for the causes. And it could have been any of them. It could have been any combination of them. We don't know for with 100% certainty what exactly caused the mass hysteria that happened at the time. It might be something else entirely that historians have yet to uncover. But that's what we do know. Okay, let's dive into modern witchcraft. Okay, so by the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment had taken over. Witchcraft was no longer something thought of as often, but in the 20th century, interest began to increase again. Inspired by Margaret Murray's 1921 theories, which were later discredited, interest intensified in the 1950s when Gerald Gardner claimed that witchcraft was still being practiced in England, though this claim too was later discredited. The modern Wiccan religion is based on Murray's and Gardner's writings, as well as the writings of occultist Aleister Crowley. It has nothing to do with the witchcraft of the past, and instead is part of neo-paganism. Celebrations center around the moon, the goddess, the sun, and the horned god. There is not any dogmatic, moral, or ethical code, but there is this reed written by Lady Gwyn Thompson. Bide the Wiccan laws ye must, in perfect love and perfect trust. Mind the threefold law ye should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. 8 words the Wiccan reed fulfill, and it harm none, do what ye will. That last part, especially, is recited by a lot of modern Wiccans, a lot of modern neo-pagans. Traditional ritual, of course, includes cleansing the area, casting the circle, calling the quarters, wine, dancing, games, and a farewell to participants at the end. Obviously, that's not the whole thing, but we're not experts.
Now, I do want to point out some do use mead or other alcohols instead of wine.
Yes. Mead is especially useful, I think, amongst those who take the Norse path, right?
Yes, I believe. And it does vary with the path, as we just mentioned. There are lots of different paths.
Common elements in Wicca include the pentacle, the ritual knife called an athame, and the altar. All of this can be set up inside or outside. And of course, Wiccans might belong to a coven or might be eclectic or individual practitioners. So there's a lot going on there. And
And I also want to point out, Wiccans consider themselves white witches or good witches. They consider those who practice black magic to be warlocks, regardless of the sex.
and they consider themselves witches to be regardless of the sex. But then I've also heard one explanation that white magic was of the sun and black magic was of the moon.
They're different things.
There's so many different things, and that's what I mean by no one set code, no one set dogmatic moral or ethical code. So there you go. That's a brief overview of modern Wicca. And if
Very
there's
brief.
very brief. And if there are any of you out there who are practitioners of this particular faith and you want to comment and help further educate, feel free. That's awesome. Like we did last week talking about werewolves, we are wrapping this up talking about witches in pop culture. Obviously, I can't fit nearly every iconic pop culture witch in. I'm missing the characters of Harry Potter, including my favorite, Professor McGonagall, who's a total badass, by the way.
Yeah.
So is Molly Weasley.
Yeah.
We do have Casper's friend Wendy, the Good Witch. Endora and Samantha from Bewitched are here. Sabrina Spellman from Sabrina the Teenage Witch up there. But we also have to acknowledge a different version of the character from the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. There's also the Halliwell sisters from Charmed, the Sanderson sisters from Hocus Pocus, Marie Laveau as portrayed in American Horror Story. FYI, she's based on a real person. There really was a Marie Laveau, and she was known as the Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. And we have Melisandre from Game of Thrones, who I don't think any of us ever trusted.
Nah.
I hated skipping over Elphaba, aka the Wicked Witch of the West.
One I wish we could have put in there was The Witcher, a famous witch hunter that is current. He's also a witch. Oh, I believe. A witch hunter.
Okay, that's just weird.
He's on Netflix, I believe.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. There was an interview with the guy who plays the bard in that song, and he's like, I wrote the most annoying song ever. And I'm just referring to Throw a Coin to Your Witcher. And I'm just thinking, really? Have you never heard of Joxer the Mighty? We're not going there. But yeah, Elphaba, aka the Wicked Witch of the West, one of my favorite characters, along with Miss Price from Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Oh, the witch from Into the Woods.
Yes.
Okay, let me tell y'all something about the witch from Into the Woods. She was originally played by Miss Bernadette Peters, and she inspired another witch that I write about sometimes, named Agrina. For those of you who don't know, I am also a young adult fantasy author, and one of the characters in a series I recently completed is named Agrina, and she is a sorceress, and she's a bit of a smartass, and she likes to give people a hard time. And like I said, I kind of modeled her a little bit off of the witch from Into the Woods, because the witch from Into the Woods, she's so practical and dogmatic and pragmatic and not dogmatic, pragmatic. And she's just so straightforward, tells it like it is.
Yeah. And that's sort of like one of the sisters in the Practical Magic series, which
Practical Magic is a great film.
yeah.
Practical Magic is a great film. Matilda and Worst Witch are both excellent picks for kids. And Mike's favorite?
Grandmama.
Yes, Grandmama from the Addams Family. If you ever
From
want...
the original Addams Family, the black and white.
Yeah, the original one. If you ever want to read about Agrina, by the way, the series is the Five Kingdoms series. It starts with Rangers of Linwood, and it is available on Amazon. Yes, I'm self-plugging. I am shameless. Alright, so, as always, if you want to know more, if you have any questions, any comments, drop them in the comments section, or leave us a message on our Facebook page. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button here if you haven't yet. Don't forget to follow our Facebook page if you haven't yet. After all, on our Facebook, we've got an episode each week here. And on our Facebook page, we have the Daily History Fact, the Creepy Friday Fact, the cool history memes that I find. And whenever we go live, it's on the Facebook page. So there you guys go. Y'all have a good one, and we will see y'all next week.
And prepare for Halloween.